Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Ever since I first saw Assetto Corsa in 2014, ever since I first got my hands on it, and ever since I first realized what a tremendous sim it was, I have longed for the opportunity to drive the McLaren MP420. Earlier this year, VRC announced that they would be working on two Formula One cars from the 2005 season, the Renault R25 and this, the McLaren MP420. In a poll on their website, VRC gave their fans the choice to vote for their preferred car, and therefore that car would be released first. The fans voted for the R25, and we got the R25 first. However, VRC did not forget about the MP420, and a large contingent of us did vote for the MP420. Therefore, after a couple more months in development, finally VRC have released their wonderful rendition of the McLaren MP420 here for Assetto Corsa. It is, by this point, a very open secret. The McLaren MP420 is my all-time favorite Formula One car. It is the car that won the first ever Grand Prix I watched, the 2005 Monaco Grand Prix in the hands of Kimi Räikkönen. This is the car that got me obsessed with Formula One. This is the car that made my jaw drop. This is the car that made me say, wow. I must say that I am a very difficult person to impress. However, the MP420 not only impressed me, but it made an absolutely indelible mark on my opinions of motorsport, my opinions of automotive design, and everything. This car was the jumping off point for me in teaching myself, educating myself about motorsport, educating myself about cars, my obsession with all things mechanical. In large part, it does all stem back to that day in 2005, watching this thing win at Monaco. Therefore, the MP420, it is Genesis, in my opinion. This car represents everything that I like as a fan of motorsport, and it represents everything that I love about Formula One. Here it is. It looks rather unassuming, even somewhat dull, I might argue. Look at the paint. It's dark, it's muted, it's black, it's silver, it's white, and there's just the slightest hint of red on that bodywork. However, it looks rather humble. But when you get this car on a racetrack, it is quite a different story. Lap records tumble, and the earth trembles. Literally. The MP420 is McLaren's 2005 Formula One World Championship Challenger. It was designed by Mike Coughlin and Adrian Newey of the McLaren Technical Office. It is a logical evolution of the McLaren design trends of the time, beginning on the MP417 and then continuing through the ill-fated MP418, MP419 from 2004, and of course here the MP420 for the 2005 season. This is among the last of the field of the V10 runners. 2005 was the last year for the V10 in Formula One. Therefore, the MP420 represents the absolute zenith of Formula One technology within the last 20 years. This is probably, on aggregate, the fastest Formula One car of all time. Therefore, it is also quite likely, on aggregate, the fastest race car, full stop, of all time in terms of circuit racing cars. If you want to find something faster, you've got to start looking at top fuel dragsters. Yes, that is the level of performance that we're talking about. This makes the Ferrari F2004 look slow, and that's definitely saying something. Under the skin here on the MP420, it is, of course, a 2005 car. Therefore, we are seeing carbon everywhere per the design trends of the era. The chassis is a molded carbon fiber aluminum honeycomb composite structure incorporating front and side impact structures. Of course, the ever safety conscious FIA mandated side impact test. That's one of the reasons why the MP418, you could argue this car's immediate predecessor, did not make it to the racetrack in anger. Front and rear suspension, we have double wishbone push rod, inboard mounted torsion bars, and dampers there, operated by bell cranks. The dampers mounted on the top of the chassis as it was in the era, front and rear suspension using that layout. The engine in this thing, as we mentioned, it is a 3-liter V10. Specifically, it is the Mercedes-Benz FO110R. Yes, the last Formula One V10 produced by Mercedes-Benz. There it is. Absolutely glorious engine. The transmission is a McLaren 7-speed plus reverse semi-automatic paddle shift unit. And the fuel, Mobil 1, the tires, Michelin, And that's about it in terms of the known technical details on this MP420. That 3-liter V10 is producing about 1,000 horsepower. Yes, you heard that right. 4-digit power figure, 1,000 horsepower. I know it's rated at about 970, 980, but trust me, it's 1,000 horsepower. Competition history on the MP420 reads a bit like this. Of course, it was fielded by then McLaren Mercedes in 2005. It was driven principally by Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya. However, due to an injury to Montoya earlier in the season, Pedro de la Rosa and Alexander Wurz did get a couple starts each in this car. The car made its race debut at the 2005 Australian Grand Prix, which was the season opener back then, and over the course of 19 races, it won 10 of them. It scored podiums in 18 of them. It scored fastest lap in 12 of them and scored pole position for 7 of them. Despite having won the balance of the season with its 10 wins out of 19, it did not win the Drivers' nor the Constructors' Championship. Kimi Räikkönen was McLaren's challenger for the Drivers' Championship. However, poor reliability plagued both Räikkönen and Montoya over the course of the season, thereby allowing Renault and Fernando Alonso to seal up the Constructors' and Drivers' Championships. It would be the first Drivers' Championship for Fernando Alonso, a feat that he would replicate the following year in 2006. Renault, of course, would also take their second consecutive Constructors' Championship in 2006. However, enough of the competition history on this car. And that is a storied competition history, I must say. However, what I'd like to do here is just bask in the glory of this thing. This is a car that I have not seen in a sim since way back in the R-Factor 1 days when CTDP did their brilliant 2005 mod. I drove the hell out of the MP420 from that mod because it is my all-time favorite Formula 1 car. However, that was then and this is now. Sim racing and technology in general has moved on quite a lot since those R-Factor 1 days, since we were pounding around in CTDP's MP420. Now, in full 4K HD, we have the ability to drive, once again, the McLaren MP420, the fastest Formula 1 car of all time. Now, I know that a few of you are going to take a little bit of, not quite offense, but you are going to raise your hand and say, excuse me, that I say that it's the fastest Formula 1 car of all time. And yes, I definitely hear your concern. However, the reason why this car possibly did not take every single lap record during the balance of the season was not because the car is in any way slower than, let's say, the F2004. It's because in 2005, we had this ridiculous rule that said qualifying times and the race had to be set on the same set of tires. Therefore, the tires could not be changed, A, between qualifying and the race, and B, not during the race itself. So yes, a single set of tires had to do all of qualifying and all of the Grand Prix. And we'll definitely get back to that point because we saw some knock-on effects of that in some races. Arguably, there's one race in particular that could have cost Kimi Räikkönen the World Championship due to that tire change rule. Despite that, when you look at the MP420, it is in every possible regard superior to the Ferrari F2004, it is superior to the Ferrari F2002, and it is superior to the Renault R25. Therefore, this, by my estimation, is the fastest Formula 1 car ever. End of sentence. Anyway, let's just take a look at what VRC have produced here. VRC, hands down, unequivocally, are producing the best Assetto Corsa mods available right now. They are better than everybody else. That's another controversial statement that I'll make here in this showroom piece. But it's true. Look at what they have been producing. MP422, F2007, Jordan 191, Williams FW37, the list goes on. And they're all absolutely gloriously produced cars, inside and out. The physics, the modeling, the textures, they are absolutely immaculate. And here, the MP420. Just look at it. Nobody's got an answer to these guys. 100%. Anyway, what have they given us? Well, as we can see, it is quite resemblant of the McLaren MP420. And when I say quite resemblant, I mean damn near photorealistic. Have a look at that. It is just glorious to look at. Everything, the shapes, the textures, the proportions, the placement of all the graphics, the reflections, it is tremendous. You will notice that there are somewhat fewer reflections on this car, somewhat less reflective properties on this car than perhaps on the R25, which I suppose is its nearest comparison. But you have to remember the kind of paint that McLaren were using. It was more or less a matte finish, and it's dark colors to begin with. So a couple people have said something, maybe the reflections don't look quite right. I think they look exactly right. You've got to look at the colors that you're dealing with. You're talking about very high contrast, so reflections don't really have the same optical qualities on light colors as they do on darker, more rich colors. So there they are. Anyway, though, have a look at the details all over this car. This front wing, here in 2005, the deep dish spoon sections on that center element of the front wings there. Of course, that was to get around the rules that were saying about 25% less downforce than 2004, but there you go. There's that front wing. It looks terrifyingly simplistic by modern standards, but back in the day, this was state-of-the-art. Looks like we have a triple element wing, and then of course it is attached to the nose via those two very widely spaced short pylons. Very, very cool. Front suspension there's your double wishbone push rod arrangement. That is the same front and rear, and you can see great interface detail there between the suspension elements and the side of the chassis, as well as the push rod there going up into the damper just underneath the top of the monocoque. Very, very cool. Great tire textures there as well, as you can see on these grooved Michelins. Remember grooved tires back in this era as well. And then you can see that wonderful sidewall and rim detail. Marvelous. I even like that center wheel nut there with the safety pins. Absolutely immaculate, guys. Inside the wheel, AP Racing calipers, and you can see the carbon ceramic discs in there. 100% authentic. Love it. Absolutely love it. Looking toward the midsection there's the very large Siemens logo. Of course, Siemens is an electronics company. They produce all sorts of things, including a lot of electronics components that McLaren used on this car and used on their other cars back in the day as well. In the center section, you can see the barge board treatment here, rather conventional for the era. The large principal barge boards, which are angular and roughly quadrilateral in their appearance, and then, of course, the lower barge boards mounted more forward of that. Again, we are just trying to pick up the air and start funneling it in two directions. One way around the sides of the car to try and accelerate the flow from behind the rear tires, cut down on the turbulence, as well as to direct it toward the rear zone and toward the diffuser, which we'll have a look at as well. Top side of the center section, wonderful unbroken lines here across the front and top section of this monocoque, punctuated by that little fin there. As you can see there, it's white on white, so it's a little hard to see, but that fin is housing an onboard camera, which looked back at the driver. We did see plenty onboard shots of the era from that camera. Very, very cool. And then, of course, looking into the cockpit, wing mirrors, they're just wing mirrors. They're conventional. They do their job, but hey, gotta have mirrors. Into the cockpit there, you can see wonderful detail. Again, it looks suitably Spartan, I must say. It certainly complements the exterior quite well, but you can see the ignition is switched on at least. You've got the shift lights across the top. Marvelous, marvelous. Toward the midsection of the car, just to rears of the cockpit, you can see Kimi Raikkonen's name's on the car at the moment with the Finnish flag just above that Hugo Boss logo, and then you can also see Kimi and then the stylized Raikkonen written in red, sort of at 30 or so degrees relative to the main name there, Kimi. And that same design is reiterated here on the side pod. Very, very cool. Also, I remember I was a brand new Formula One fan at the time. I did very much appreciate that McLaren put the drivers' names on the cars so I could more easily recognize them. Very, very cool. Toward the top side here, you can see one of these cooling chimneys. These became ubiquitous in about 2004, 2005, and then just to rears of that, a little auxiliary flick up here just to help clear up some of that wash, get it over the rear tire rather than falling into that turbulent air just a rears of it. Looking at the rear zone, here's where things start to get complicated and oh so beautiful on this car. Rear tire, of course, and then as the rear end swings into view, just have a look. We've got the rear wing here, wonderfully modeled end plates, wonderfully modeled main plane, wonderfully modeled beam wing with that Michelin logo there, and then the diffuser section. This is absolutely juicy, is it not? Yes, it certainly is. Just look at this. Absolutely massive. Looks quite similar to what you see on the R25 as well as on the F2004. You can see it's essentially a triple element diffuser in terms of its three layers. You have obviously the reference plane of the car, and then you have the outboard sections just to the outboard left and right of the center tunnel, and then you've got the center tunnel itself. Marvelous, marvelous. You've got the rain light in here, which is enclosed inside its own fairing. The rain light, of course, is operable, as you can see here, and they have bothered to model all of the individual bulb elements in that rain light, as well as the carbon detail. It's glorious stuff. Top side, you can see those absolutely menacing looking exhausts coming out of the engine bay there. Of course, 2 banks of 5 cylinders to make your V10 engine. This car screams, and the sound all comes from those 2 exhaust pipes. Incredible stuff. Also, you'll notice, if you're somewhat newer to Formula One, you'll notice that the exhaust pipes are exiting topside. We are not blowing straight out of the rear wing like we do today in a single pipe. Of course, today's engines are turbocharged, and the FIA says they have to be single turbo, which means you'll have 1 exhaust outlet. Therefore, you've got the center pipe coming out by the rear wing. But in these days, the idea was not to route the exhaust as far rears as possible. The idea was you could vent the exhaust as soon as it leaves the engine, and because that flow is at high speed and high pressure, you could actually use it to do some aerodynamic work. So you can see what McLaren have done here on the rear suspension. You can see this gold foil that's wrapped around the inboard elements of the rear suspension, just pretty much around where it picks up around the gearbox, and you can see that the exhaust pipes are angled straight toward the upper elements of that rear suspension. They are definitely using the rear suspension for an aerodynamic advantage, and they are also quite clearly blowing the beam wing here. The beam wing is that lower element of the rear wing where you can see these Michelin decals. They are blowing the rear suspension, and they are blowing the beam wing. In addition to that, you can also see this blackened section of the rear bodywork. This is not paint. This is heat-treated carbon, and the reason why they've done this is it appears that they are using the Coanda effect from that exhaust plume to get that exhaust plume to attach itself to the rear bodywork and then blow the rain light housing. You can see how the rain light has its own little winglet section. This appears to be an early version of the monkey seat winglet. And you see the Formula One teams now in 2017 running a little winglet above the exhaust outlet, which they call a monkey seat. But they did not have that technology in 2005. However, this certainly looks to be a precursor to it. Absolutely marvelous detail. Absolutely love it. Coming around the shadowed side of the car, here come some of the reflective decals here and details. But, yep, Mobil 1, Mercedes-Benz, all of that wonderful sponsorship stuff and all of that wonderful modeling and texturing. It just looks oh so glorious. Again, have I mentioned how much I love this car? I don't think I have quite enough. I love this car. It is my favorite Formula One car of all time, and finally we have it. Can you tell I'm a little excited? Yes, just a little bit. Anyway, we've taken a good look at the exterior. Let's take a little look at the interior. To the cockpit. We fly in here to the cockpit. This is more or less the driving position, I must say, so you can get a decent idea of the proportions and sightlines here. One thing that you will notice if you're more familiar with the more modern cars is when we look to the side, you see the cockpit surround. This is that deformable padding that you're used to seeing, but it's not nearly as high as it is nowadays. This is how it worked back in 2004, 2005. However, going back front and center, what have we got going on? There's our steering wheel. It looks quite similar to the other McLaren steering wheels of the era. VRC's MP4 22 has a very similar looking steering wheel because that car is only 2 years newer than the MP4 20, so steering wheel design doesn't change that quickly. However, of course, the modern steering wheels, they've got LCD screens on them. You could probably watch a movie on them if you wanted to, but back in 05, none of that. You still had a traditional instrument panel on the dashboard in conjunction with the steering wheel, in most of the cars anyway, so there it is. That's how that cookie crumbles. You can see that steering wheel, though, wonderfully modeled with all of those switches and buttons and knobs and everything that the driver would need to adjust whatever parameters he needed to adjust on the track. And then additionally, you've got some ancillary controls onto the right-hand side as well as some controls here on the lower sides of the monocoque. Looks to be a fire button there, the big red button off on the left-hand side of the bulkhead, the right-hand side rather, and then below that we've got knobs that adjust something, probably radio volume, maybe something for a heated visor, but that seems to be about it to me. Over here on the left-hand side, looks like we have stuff for brake bias, and probably a master ignition kill. Aside from that, though, that's what's going on in the cockpit. Down here, you can see that they have modeled at least the shape of the seat. I can't quite tell if this is a seat or it's just They've modeled the cockpit to be the shape of a seat, but there it is. Also, you'll notice no seat belts yet in this car. This is 0.1 beta spec, I should mention, but yeah, it doesn't matter. 0.1 beta, it's basically finished as far as I'm concerned. Moving rears here, you can see some wonderful carbon detail on the rear of the chassis, and then moving up, here's that cockpit surround, and then there's your snorkel with the T-bar on top, replete with camera mount. Oh, yes, yes, yes. I love it. VRC, once again, you guys are making the best Assetto Corsa mods right now, and the details that you include really cements my opinion of that. Nobody is doing this as good as you guys do, and certainly nobody is doing it better. So, hats off to you once again. You can see once we have the car alive, you'll be able to see more information on the dashboard, but you'll see speed on the left-hand side in that left-hand window. You'll have a gear position in the center, and then you'll have fuel level in the right. But that's about it in terms of the dashboard. You can see the shift lights are on. They will cycle up from left to right, from green, red to blue, when it's time to change up to the next gear. But aside from that, that's what's going on in the cockpit. It is pretty simple. There's no DRS, there's no KERS, there's no ERS, none of that stuff to worry about. It's just you and the car. Go, stop, change gear, that's about it. But it all happens very, very quickly. We'll leave the cockpit now, and we'll just take one final look at this absolutely glorious McLaren MP4 20 brought to us by our friends at VRC. Guys, I just have to tell you, wonderful, absolutely wonderful work. Keep it up. Thank you all so very, very much for your hard work and dedication at bringing this car to us. I have waited for such a long time to drive an MP4 20 in Assetto Corsa, and now I have done it. Of course, we have to drive the car for the second part of this review, so we are going to drive the car. Whew. Yes, I hope you're ready. We're going to take it to Imola, and we're going to absolutely thrash it. We'll see you at Imola next.
My oh my, the portentous moment has arrived. Welcome to Imola. As always, let's have a look through the setup screen and show you what's going on here on VRC's McLaren MP4 20. Here on the gear screen, you can see your gearbox first through 7th gear and the final drive ratio, all fully adjustable to your heart's content. We're topping out right now in 7th gear at 327 kilometers an hour. These are the default gearings. On the tire screen, you've got your choice of those Michelin compounds. The mediums are the default, but you've got the soft and super soft as well as the hard. Default tire pressures on all four corners, 13 psi on the front and 12 psi on the rear. The lowest value that you can select here on the front and rear is 12 psi. Fuel, we've zeroed it out here to keep the engine quiet, but the fuel capacity on the car is 130 liters. Remember, refueling was a thing back in 2005. Electronics traction control, it defaults to 5, somewhat counterintuitively for Assetto Corsa anyway. VRC seem to have set up their traction control in the opposite direction, meaning 1 is the least assist and 6 is the most assist. I believe that is the way it works. Again, we'll be testing this out because I still haven't quite hashed that out for myself, but 5 is the default value. We'll confirm that in a few minutes. The aero screen, front and rear wing angles here. They do not adjust visually, but the effects are, of course, modeled in the sim when you change your settings. Defaults to 12 on the front and 6 on the rear. Maximum rear is 10, and of course, minimum is 0. Maximum front is 20, and of course, minimum there is 0. On the alignment, camber toe on all four corners, default value shown here. Dampers, your bound and rebound, your bump and rebound anyway. You can see the settings here on all four corners. Defaults to 10 on the bound side and 10 on the rebound side for the front, and then 6 for the rear. Drivetrain, this is your differential adjustment. 10% power, 30% coast, and 10 Newton meters on the preload side on default setup. Generic, your engine limiter, so this is your rev limiter settings, goes down to 95 if you want, and all the way up to 100. Keep it at 100, folks. Brake bias defaults to 56% to the front, 100% of brake power there, and then steer assist, that's basically your power steering, defaults to 100. Suspensions main, this is the first of 2 suspension screens. Here we've got anti-roll bars front and rear, the heave damper as well, ride heights and wheel rates to top all of that off on all four corners. The secondary screen for suspension, you can set your heave damper travel range, and then for all four corners as well, the travel range is there on the push rods. That's about it in terms of the setup screen on this MP420. It is a run-of-the-mill Formula One car setup screen. Remember, there's no hybrid system, there's no turbo, there's no KERS, there's no DRS, none of that. It's just a pure car, which is the way it always should be. Without further ado, however, let's go out here on default setup and show you what's going on. So let's default everything out. We'll return to default there. 90 liters of fuel on board, so the car is quite heavy. It is fueled for a full stint, but let's just see how everything feels here on default setup. Now that the cockpit is alive, we can show you what's going on with our instrumentation. There's not much. On that LCD on the dashboard, we have our speed that's going to read out in kilometers per hour. In the center, we've got a gear display, of course, so neutral right now, up through the box all the way up to 7th gear, down through the box, down to reverse, and then back to neutral, and then our fuel level there in the right-hand window on the dash, 90 liters displayed. In addition to that, for our purposes, we have the pedals in the lower left as always, and now let's go out here for our first run on default setup in the MP420. Up to 80 kilometers an hour, which is our pit lane speed limit here. And now on to the racetrack. Just get up and down through the box a couple of times. Start to build some heat in the brakes and the tires. Medium compound Michelins, remember. And of course, these 2005 tires were designed to do the entire race distance plus qualifying. So they're pretty hard. I'm not even trying to push the car right now, and you can see that it's definitely up there in the realm of speediness. Oh yeah, just 2 gears up to red line. It's intense. All right, well, I think we've cut some heat in the brakes now. Let's do a flying lap, shall we? Remember, we are very heavy on fuel and we're on the medium tire, so this is not all out pace by any means. 320, 321, braking. Still working on some warm up in those tires. All right, the first sector's already done. Toast the traction control working overtime there. Up the hill, 6th gear. We'll redline it into 6 basically. 4th here. Yes. Be a little bit cautious here through Acqua Minerale. These really hard tires take about 2 laps to come up to temperature when you're going at race pace, so we're still in the final stages of that warm-up. Now to Rivazza, plunging downhill, jumping on the brakes, picking up that first apex, using the curbing. 3rd gear down to the 2nd Rivazza, pick up the apex, hard over the curbs on the exit. Now down the straight. We've done 2 laps, 1 warm-up and 1 flying lap, and we've already burned 9 liters of fuel doing 2 laps. Fuel efficient, it is not, but fast. Oh my God, is it fast. Now you may be wondering of my choice of Imola to do this review. And a few of you have asked me, what is it with you and Imola? Well, I shall answer that question with another question. What is it with Imola and being awesome? Can anybody answer me that question? If you can answer me that question, then I'll answer your question. It is just the most awesome racetrack on the planet as far as I'm concerned. It's the perfect combination of high speed, low speed, technical stuff, long straights. It requires great engine power. It requires a very compliant chassis to get it over the harsh curbing. And it's a short lap. So you've got all of this technicality just packed into a lap that takes less than 1:20. It's absolutely tremendous. Straight braking for Tamburello. Hit the apex that time on the power hard. Using all of the exit curbs and a little bit of grass, throw it into the Villeneuve chicane. And Tosa, sector 1 is already gone. That's unbelievable speed in this car. And its default setup. Heavy on fuel on the medium tires. There are 2 compounds softer than this. When we're really on a flyer, we'll be taking that first Aqua Minerale corner in 7th gear. Yeah, 7th gear. Anyway, though, let's get down to some business. How's the car feel? Well, it feels incredibly compliant. This is the default setup. So this was the first setup I ran in that live stream shakedown a couple days ago, and it's really, really confidence-inspiring straight away. You've got plenty of grip. I like a pointy car. I like to be able to use the front axle as my frame of reference and getting the car into the corner. This car will do that all day long. It is very pointy, yet it's very stable at the same time. The really hard tires, yes, you do notice how hard they are, but at the same time, it's what the car was designed to run, so it utilizes them very efficiently, I must say. You're not really left wanting for more mechanical grip. It does bite, despite the tires being hard and despite the tires being grooved. Bit of a lock up there. Engine power, well, you've got quite a lot of it. We mentioned in showroom view, we've got about 1,000 horsepower, and yes, you've got about 1,000 horsepower. It is an absolutely insane amount of kick in the backside that you get when you get the power down on this thing. It just goes. It is the hand of God pushing you along. It feels much more tractable than the current V6 turbo hybrids, I must say, because you get the power from the ERS on those engines, and it can be a little bit inconsistent sometimes. It can be too much, it can be too little, and it always runs out of juice at the end of the long straights. Not this thing. It just pulls hard through all the gears until it runs into its terminal velocity. Chassis dynamics, well, I mentioned, it's pointy, but it's stable. There is ever so slightly an amount of oversteer in the low speed corners, but the traction control system stamps that out as you get back on the throttle, so that's pretty much a moot point. The brakes feel very good, they feel very consistent. Once they're up to temperature, you slam on the brakes and the car just stops. It really is like that. You've got a ton of downforce, and you've got those very powerful brakes, so the car just basically stops on a dime, as you would expect this mid-2000s Formula One car to do. Gearbox is very, very quick. It is not seamless, so it's not as quick as, say, the 2007 gearboxes, so the MP4 22 has a faster gearbox than this, but not by much, I must say. Only 2 years between those cars, of course. But just the way that it gets into and out of the corners, it is unlike anything else. The Kunos F2004, it's a little wobbly as it's going into the corners, and the high-speed corners, you can definitely sense the body roll. This thing, flat, 100% flat. traction control does feel a little bit intrusive at the higher settings. We can turn it down a bit. And there you see you can get a little bit more play in the traction control. The higher up you go in the numbers, the more assist you get. So that's confirmed. I'm now running at 2 out of 6, and you can see the rear end is a bit more squirrely. If I turn it down to 1 out of 6, the Variante Alta, you'll definitely notice. And of course, you turn the traction control off, and yeah, you're going to be slower because the car is designed to run with traction control. But it is compliant enough to run it without TC if you so desire. I do not recommend running it without TC, though. The car is designed to run traction control. So 6 out of 6 is maximum assist. See here through Ambarello. That engine in its power curve and all of the suspension and the differential, it was designed to run with traction control. That was allowed in 2005, so the car is optimized for that TC assist. Default brake bias at 56% to the front axle feels good. I'm not really locking the wheels up too much. I personally prefer a car to be a bit pointy anyway, so I would want to shift that bias toward the front axle as much as possible. So that feels good for me. And when I'm not paying attention, that happens. But overall here on default setup, now that we've burned off quite a bit of fuel, the car is really just starting to come to me a bit more. I just absolutely love how early you can get on the power out of the corners, and it just bites. I mean, if I tried that in the F2004, that would be a graceful pirouette off into oblivion, but not here. Mid-air, hard on the throttle. It doesn't care. It is designed for one thing and one thing only, to absolutely attack the racetracks of the earth and to make lap records tumble in the process. All right, well, that's all well and good. The numerically minded among us might be wondering about the lap times. What is our fastest lap at this point? 1:19.472. All right, that's not bad, but it's not great. We can go a lot faster than that if we want. Not sure if we're going to get going faster than that today, but we are definitely going to have a look. So let's go back to the pits, and let's load up a bit faster of a setup, shall we? All right, so I haven't touched anything with the gears because it feels pretty good here, but we are running the super soft tires at the lowest pressures on all four corners, so 12 PSI, down 1 PSI on the rears there. 24 liters of fuel on board. We'll put a bit more in the tank just for some extended running, but still less than we had before. Traction control maximum 6 out of 6. We can run 5 out of 6 or even 4 out of 6. It doesn't really seem to affect it too badly. But now the downforce, maximum downforce. Yeah, you might think that this is something you don't want to do, but trust me, you've got 1,000 horsepower behind you. It can overcome the drag. Don't worry about that. Otherwise, pretty much default suspension settings. I do want to open up the diff a little bit more. Brake bias is default, and everything else is pretty much default. So, let's have a look. With this setup, it is possible to do a 116 around this place. Again, I don't know if we're going to do that today, but it is possible. We'll leave the lap times up for this one. Now on these super soft tires, you will notice an increase in mechanical grip, of course. Lowering the tire pressures does help the bite out of the corners in terms of the traction across the rear axle, so that's also quite welcome. And of course the increased downforce, you'll notice that through the high-speed corners. All right, off to a flying lap now. You will notice a bit of a decrease in straight line speed. We were hitting 321 before, now we're hitting 311, so we've lost about 10 clicks. But the amount of performance that you pick up through the corners more than makes up for that. Already up half a second in Sector 1. See what I mean? Yeah. 7th gear for the first Aqua Minerale. Yes, I told you it was possible. It's possible. Variante Alta. 1.3 seconds down on our session best. And the time, a 1:17.830, 1.6 seconds better than session best. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, guys. The speed just absolutely destroys the stopwatch. I mean, you can melt stopwatches with this car. Up 2.5 tenths already. It absolutely will melt stopwatches. They can't tick fast enough. This car puts a hole in the space-time continuum. It builds a warp bubble around itself, if you want to think of it that way, for any astrophysicists out there, cosmologists who happen to be watching this. Stephen Hawking, hello. That's what this car does. That's how McLaren were so fast in 2005. However, all of you may then be wondering, how did it not win the World Championship? And I still cannot answer that question apart from, well, let's see, at the San Marino Grand Prix, I remember Raikkonen retired from the lead with a drive shaft failure. I remember at the French Grand Prix, he had a grid penalty for an engine change. I remember at the Hungarian Grand Prix, Juan Pablo Montoya dropped out from second place with another drive shaft failure. I remember at Monza, Kimi had another grid penalty for an engine change. So you can definitely see the reliability was the Achilles heel for this car. But it was the fastest thing we've ever seen. And I think this is a testament to that. I'm not even really concentrating that much, and I'm still going faster and faster every lap. It is just immensely quick. So I turn in slightly. Went for the conservative line. second one on the power. On the power as soon as you hit the apex. Let the traction control do its job. 17.272, 0.02 of a second slower than the last lap. Can you say consistent? I can definitely say consistent. Again, it will break stopwatches. Ah, you might have thought I was in trouble there. Nope. Nope. Car's there for you. Might have thought I was in trouble there, too. Nope. Car's still there for you. It's just so great. Everything this car does is great. It stops, it goes, it turns, it grips. It doesn't grip when you don't want it to grip. It's absolutely perfect in every way. And it's all punctuated and tied together with that V10 soundtrack. I remember this engine sound was one of the most unique engine sounds that I've ever heard. The onboard shots with that almost unassuming drone, as you can hear right now, and you'll hear it better on the hot laps later. But I mean, it just heralds the arrival of so much horsepower. Little wobble, the bounce on the upshifts that you get. VRC, you did a great job of replicating that. Now we're 4 thousandths up in Sector 2, and we turn this into a new session best. Nope, not now. Tried to get a little bit greedy. Oh well. We've got enough fuel for one more flying lap. But even at that, with that pretty big set of mistakes in Sector 3, it's still a 117. We're faster than Formula Hybrid, by the way, and we're a lot faster than the SF70H. Six liters of fuel, 5 liters of fuel. We're up in Sector 2. Wow. 1.5 tenths. Big improvements are still possible. Car in as tight to the wall as we dare. 116.899. Yeah, that's a 116. While doing live recording, while talking to you. Yeah, that's what this car can do. Let's back off a bit because we're going to run out of gas at this rate. I'd like to get it back into the pit lane. Whew, it's just, it's so fast. It is so amazingly fast. And I'm so glad that if anybody was ever going to make this car, I am so glad that it was VRC who decided to take up the challenge, because this car is very special to me. It is the car that won the first Grand Prix I ever watched, Monaco 05. And before I really became cognizant of anything else, before I learned about the technology, before I learned about just how ridiculously fast these things are, before I learned about all the drivers and where they come from and all of the Grand Prix venues, all the countries in the world that Formula One visits year in and year out, the one thing that got me interested and excited about Formula One was the sound of the cars. They sounded like nothing else I had ever heard. As I was watching that 05 Monaco race, I was trying to figure out in my 12, 13-year-old knowledge at the time, what on earth could make a sound like that? And the only thing I had ever heard that sounded even remotely like those V10 Formula One engines were jets. So I was thinking, are these cars powered by gas turbines of some sort? Because I just had no knowledge that a piston engine could run that quickly. But sure enough, I did my research. I learned that the cars were powered by V10s with actual pistons in them. And they were spinning at close to 20,000 RPM. So that explained the sounds. But just, that's what did it for me in terms of really getting into Formula One, becoming interested in this sport in the first place. It was this car and the sound it made as it was pounding around Monaco with Kimi Räikkönen winning that race. And if anybody was going to make this mod, I am so pleased that it is VRC who decided to do it, because I think VRC, as I said in the showroom piece, they are making the best Assetto Corsa open-wheeler mods right now. And again, they have not disappointed here with the MP420. It is the perfect successor to the MP422, the F2007, the R25, the FW19, and now we've got the MP420. It fits in so nicely with the rest of their lineup. The workmanship on this mod, inside and out, in terms of the physics, in terms of the sounds, everything is just as good as it needs to be, and perhaps even a little bit better. I mean, again, have a look at this car now in the natural lighting in the pit lane. I don't see any pixelation really running around here. Do you? I don't see a logo out of place. I don't see a color blend that's done incorrectly. Just look at the line here on the side pod between the white section and the gray section. You can see how they have blended the colors there to create that slight shadowing effect in the paint. They've done that perfectly. It's really immaculate in every possible regard. It really is. I can't fault it for anything. And trust me, when I look at these mods, I try to find something wrong with them. I really do. And I can't find anything wrong with this MP420. The only thing that's wrong with it is it didn't come out sooner. That's the only criticism that I will levy against VRC in this capacity. However, in the meantime, they gave us the R25, which is also 100% brilliant. And they gave us the FW19, which is also 100% brilliant. So I can't even really fault them for the timeline, because to put together a project like this takes time. As far as I know, the MP420 was in development for the better part of 6 months. So it was developed alongside the R25, and they finished the R25 first. But, I mean, it's just so perfect in every way. It's the perfect subject matter. It's the perfect rendering of really the car that should have won the 2005 World Championship. But for reliability, that would have happened, I'm sure. But the fact now that we can get this thing now in Assetto Corsa and we can experience what it must have been like to drive the fastest Formula One car of all time, that is just absolutely priceless as far as I'm concerned. If this has not convinced you to go donate to these guys and get your hands on this 0.1 beta spec, if you can believe that it's 0.1 beta, please go over there to the VRC website, link in the description, and go donate to these guys, because this is what they're capable of producing. There it is. It's literally perfect in every possible regard. This is what they're capable of doing. This is what they want to continue doing in the future. Your donation will help them achieve this right here. So please, if you do want to have a go in this car, go over to the VRC webpage, link in the description, and go donate to them, because they'll really appreciate it, and you, in return, will get this, among a whole bunch of other really great Formula One cars that they have already released, both in public release as well as in beta spec. Honestly, you cannot go wrong with these guys. I would gladly shell out $50 for a DLC with this car in it. And only this car in it. I would very gladly open up my wallet and spend $50 for a DLC MP420 official from Kunos if it were as good as this. And I would not complain about it at all. But that's not what they're asking. They're not asking $50. They're asking $3. Really, you cannot go wrong with that. I make $3 in about 1.5 minutes at my job. So 1.5 minutes of work is equivalent to getting the chance to drive this car whenever I want for as long as I want. That is worth it, in my opinion. However, enough of my impromptu salesman pitch. Just take a look at the VRC, guys. You will not be sorry about it. In terms of what's happening here right now, that concludes the on-track portion of this review piece. That concludes the commentary portion of this review piece. I do hope that you have enjoyed this one. I've really enjoyed this one as well. Of course, there are hot laps to follow here from Imola, from external as well as onboard shots. So please do stay tuned for that. Until next time, though, thank you all very, very much for watching. FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much for your support, your engagement, your comments, your likes, and of course your subscriptions. We are just about to hit 3,200 subscribers. In fact, by the time this video goes live, we probably will have hit 3,200 subscribers. So thank you all very, very much for that. And if you are new to the channel, welcome. Very happy to have you here. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. FerrariMan601 saying thank you, and we will see you soon.